The milk had just started to rise in the saucepan when Eli said, "Mom says I'm not supposed to bring this folder anymore," and set his blue spelling folder on the kitchen table like it belonged to some other child. I remember the exact sound it made against the wood. Thin, flat, wrong. The stove clicked under the pot, and for 1 second I stood there with the spoon in my hand, looking at that folder while the oatmeal smell thickened in the kitchen and the first cold of October pressed against the window over the sink. Eli was already reaching for the cinnamon shaker, the way he always did on Mondays, standing on his toes, his hair still damp from where I'd run a washcloth over the crown of his head, because he never let me wet it properly in the mornings. Everything looked like itself. The same red-striped bowl, the same little dinosaur spoon he preferred, even though he was 8 and claimed he was too old for dinosaur anything now. But the folder sat there with his name printed across the tab in black marker, and something in me went tight before I had language for it. Not supposed to bring it where I asked? He shrugged without looking up. School, I guess. You guess. He gave the cinnamon 2 hard shakes and then another too much for a child who usually measured it like it mattered. Mom said there's gonna be a different thing. A different thing, I said. That was as far as he got, because he smiled the way children do when they know they have used an adult phrase without understanding it and are hoping it sounds solid enough to keep from being questioned. I watched him stir the cinnamon into the oatmeal and felt that small private discomfort again, the kind that arrives before fear, before anger. When a house lets you know some part of its rhythm has shifted and you were not in the room when it happened. I turned the burner down and told myself Claire had probably signed him up for some reading group or after-school program and forgotten to mention it. Claire had been forgetting things lately, though, only the kind of things that seemed harmless when I named them that way. A pickup time shifting by 20 minutes, a lunch packed differently, a call not returned until the next morning with that bright, tired voice women use when they want to sound grateful and busy at the same time. It had been 14 months since June died, and the family still moved around that fact like furniture too heavy to relocate. We adjusted ourselves instead. The kitchen carried her more than any room in the house, not in some grand, haunted way, in practical ways. The clean dish towel folded over the oven bar with the stripes aligned because she used to say disorder in linens spread to the soul. The row of spice jars labeled in her square, careful handwriting. The old clock above the pantry with a tiny chip in the enamel flower at the edge where Eli had once thrown a foam airplane and cried for 10 minutes because he thought he had broken Grandma's favorite thing. She had kissed the top of his head and told him anything worth keeping was allowed a mark or 2. The house still held that sentence. A lot of her sentences had settled into the walls. I set the saucepan down and portioned the oatmeal between our bowls. Eli was wearing the navy hoodie I kept at my place for school mornings, sleeves shoved up uneven, one sock twisted so the heel sat halfway under his foot. I almost said something about it, but then he looked up and smiled at me with his mouth full, and for a second I saw June so sharply in the shape of his cheek and the little notch in his chin that it took the air from me. June always saw resemblance first. She could look at a child across a crowded room and find which grandparent had left a thumbprint on the face. When Eli was 3 and still soft all over, she had tapped the piano wood twice with her knuckle, the way she did before playing, and said, "That boy's got your quiet and my people's eyes. Lord help him, he'll feel too much and pretend not to." I had laughed then. I did not laugh now. "You eat," I said. "I am eating. You're talking more than eating. That's because you make Monday oatmeal too hot. It's called cooked Eli. It's called trying to burn my tongue off before school." He grinned. I grinned back. False safety has the manners of ordinary love. That is what I know now. It looks like cinnamon on a child's upper lip and a grandfather pretending not to notice the ache in his own chest while the October light comes thin through the curtains. I drove him every Monday because Claire's work schedule on Mondays started early, and because when June was alive, Monday mornings had somehow become ours. June would pack a half apple and cheddar cubes into a little round container, smooth Eli's cowlick, and say, "Go on, boys, bring me back a story." After she got sick, I took over the driving, then the lunch packing, then the little stories on the ride. After she died, I kept doing it because stopping would have felt like letting another piece of her go loose in the air. By 7:30 we were out the door. The front hall smelled faintly of cedar from the closet and sharpened pencil shavings from Eli's backpack. His sneakers were where he always kicked them off by the radiator the night before, though one had tipped sideways and landed against June's umbrella stand. That small collision of objects, his bright green child's shoe against her old, brass-handled umbrella stand, did something to me I could not have explained. The house was forever setting the living and the dead beside each other without asking permission. I bent and straightened his shoe, then hated myself a little for doing it. "You ready?" I asked. He was zipping his jacket. "Do I have to go all the way today? All the way to school?" He nodded, but his eyes skated away from mine too quickly. "You planning to stop halfway and make a life for yourself at the corner gas station?" He smiled, because he knew the line. "Maybe." "Well, I already bought your breakfast. You owe me at least a full day of spelling and subtraction." He lifted the backpack. "Mom said I might not have regular." Then he stopped himself. "Might not have regular what?" He pushed past me toward the door. "Nothing." The word landed between us too lightly. Children think they can make things disappear by making them smaller. Adults teach them that. We are the ones who show them how. The air outside had that dry cold that makes breath visible but not dramatic. Helen Doyle was next door in her robe, clipping back the lid on her birdseed bin. She gave us a little wave with the scoop in her hand. "Morning, Tommy," she called. "Morning, Helen. Morning, Eli." He waved, but did not answer. That was unlike him, too. Helen noticed, though she did not say so. She was 71 and had the kind of face that had worn itself into friendliness without ever losing the ability to register things. June used to say Helen missed nothing on the street except the chance to tell you she had missed nothing. I buckled Eli, and because he still allowed it at my place, though he would have denied that in public if asked. The truck smelled like coffee old leather and the faint, clean sweetness of the applesauce pouch that had burst in the side pocket sometime in late spring. No matter how many times I wiped it down. Eli kicked his heels softly against the seat edge while I pulled away from the curb. On the drive, I asked him about the spelling test he had told me about on Thursday. He said, "I don't think I'm doing that one now." "Why not?" He shrugged. "You keep shrugging. I'm going to start charging you by the shrug." He smiled again, but it felt delayed, as if he were checking first to see whether smiling was the right answer. "You know I said gentler. Now you can just tell me if something changed." He looked out the window. "Mom said there's a transition." There it was again. One of those adult words set down into a child's mouth like furniture too heavy for the room. A transition to what? He traced a line in the fogged corner of the glass with one finger. Just different. By then, we were already turning onto the school road, and I told myself I was making too much of a boy, repeating what he had half heard in the kitchen of another house. Kids picked up words from adults, the way dog hair found black pants. It did not mean the dog had moved in permanently. I parked in the usual pickup lane and cut the engine. Eli unbuckled, swinging the backpack around with that loose-limbed speed children have when they want to get out of a conversation without looking like they are escaping one. I reached across him for the lunchbox, and he said, "No, I need that." "Need it where?" He blinked. "For later." I handed it over. "That's where lunchboxes usually go." He gave me a look that would have made June laugh. Then he was out the door, and I was following more slowly because my left knee had been reminding me all weekend that October was here, whether I invited it or not. The school smelled the way elementary schools always smell in the morning. Floor wax paper crayons, that sweet chalky scent of glue sticks and cereal bars. A bell sounded farther down the hall, and children streamed past in bright jackets and two big backpacks, all that moving little life with adults trying to channel it into lines and cubbies. Eli's teacher, Mrs. Henley, was standing just outside the classroom door with a clipboard against her chest. She was a pale woman with kind eyes and the weary, efficient posture of someone who had spent years being cheerful before coffee had fully done its job. She smiled when she saw Eli, then looked at me, then back at Eli. The smile did not vanish, so much as go blank. "Mr. Whitaker," she said. "Morning." She glanced down at the clipboard, then back up again. Her face had changed in that tiny professional way people try to control when something doesn't make sense and they are standing in front of a child. "I'm sorry," she said lower now. I thought Eli had already moved toward the cubbies. She took half a step after him and then stopped. "Is everything all right?" I asked. She looked at me the way people do when they are trying to figure out whether they are the one who has made a mistake. "Mr.
Whitaker,"
she said again, even softer. "Why is Eli here?" It is hard to describe the shape of humiliation when it comes without warning and in public. It is not heat first. It is blankness, a brief wipeout of ordinary thought. "What do you mean? Why is he here?" She drew one breath through her nose and shifted her clipboard. "Your daughter filed withdrawal paperwork 2 weeks ago." I heard the fluorescent hum over my head. I heard sneakers squeak down the hall. I heard one child laughing in another room. All of it came sharpened, as if sound itself had stepped closer. "That can't be right," I said. Mrs. Henley's eyes flicked to Eli, then back to me. "I'm sorry. I assumed you knew." "No," I said. "No, I did not know." She swallowed. "He was listed as transitioning out of district. We were told he would not be returning." The strangest part was that Eli did not look surprised. He was standing at his cubby with the lunchbox still in one hand, watching us over his shoulder with the stillness children get when adults have suddenly begun speaking in a tone meant to protect them from a truth they are already inside. I looked at him, then at her, then back at the clipboard, as if paper might explain itself if given enough eye contact. "There has to be some confusion," I said. "I brought him because it's Monday." I hated the sentence even while I said it. Too simple. Too small, as if the fact that it was Monday should have carried authority on its own. Mrs. Henley nodded quickly. "Of course. I'm sure there's an explanation. Let me just—" She trailed off because there was no clean end to that sentence. Eli spoke then. "Am I not supposed to be here?" That was the moment the room truly changed. Not because of what he said, because of how carefully he said it. No panic, no childish indignation, just measured uncertainty, like he was checking whether he had been brought into the wrong version of his own day. Mrs. Henley bent slightly, smiling again with effort. "Why don't you come inside with me for just a second, honey?" He looked at me first. I nodded because I did not know what else to do. He went in. Mrs. Henley stayed by the door and lowered her voice further. "I'm sure your daughter can clear this up. I just didn't want to—" "You thought I knew?" "Yes." I stood there with one hand still on the lunchbox strap impression in my palm. The mark it left was red and temporary. My shame felt neither. "Can he stay?" I asked. She hesitated. That hesitation did more to me than the words had. "I should probably call the office," she said. Of course she should. Of course this was how institutions worked. A child appears where paperwork says he no longer belongs, and even love has to wait while somebody verifies the line item. But standing there in that hallway with my grandson inside and a teacher speaking to me like a man who had arrived late to his own family's decisions, I felt something mean and old stir under my ribs. Mrs. Henley placed a hand lightly on my forearm. "Mr. Whitaker, I'm sorry." I nodded because I was raised to nod through humiliation until I could get somewhere private enough to name it. The office sorted it by calling Claire. I did not hear the whole conversation. I heard enough. Claire's voice, even through the receiver at the secretary's desk, carried that smooth, bright note she used when she wanted a situation to become simpler because she had entered it. Temporary mix-up, scheduling transition. I should have mentioned it to Dad. He was helping this morning and I forgot. We're still working through options. Helping. Dad. Forgot. By the time it was over, Eli was allowed to stay just for the day while Claire was expected to clarify the rest by afternoon. Just for the day. I walked back through the hall with that phrase inside me like bad food. Children's art lined the walls. Pumpkins made from torn orange paper. Construction paper bats. Little spelling words under broad pencil loops. Ordinary school things. The kind of things adults trust because they mean childhood is happening somewhere clean and measured. I remember thinking absurdly that the hallway smelled exactly the same as it had last Thursday, when none of this existed to me. As if institutions had the indecency to keep smelling like floor wax when a man's footing had just gone out from under him. Outside, the air hit colder. I sat in the truck for a minute without starting it. Eli's water bottle had rolled under the passenger seat. One of his crayons was melted slightly into the seam of the booster from summer. I picked up the water bottle, set it down, picked it up again. My hands wanted tasks. The body is loyal to routine long after the mind has lost the plot. I told myself Claire had made some temporary schooling arrangement and failed to tell me. I told myself the phrase transition could mean tutoring or district reassignment or some arts program tied to his reading. I told myself I was reacting like a widower, which is to say like a man who has lost enough that every unexplained change arrives wearing a bigger shadow than it deserves. I started the truck. Then someone knocked lightly on the passenger side window. I turned and saw Mara Bell from the music program. I knew her mostly as Ms. Mara, because that's how Eli talked about her. She was standing there in a rust-colored coat with a canvas folder under one arm, her mouth already set in that apologetic line adults wear when they are about to cross a boundary for reasons they do not fully trust. I rolled the window down. "Mr. Whitaker," she said. "Yes, I'm sorry. I wasn't sure if I should stop you." The folder was hugged tight enough under her arm to bend the corner. "It's all right." She glanced toward the school entrance, then back at me. I only heard part of that in the office. I waited. She lowered her voice. "I thought Eli had already left the district. That's what I was just told." She frowned in a way that told me she had hoped not to be right about whatever thought had stopped her in the parking lot. "I'm sorry to ask this," she said, "but if that's the case, why was he at private rehearsal yesterday?" I looked at her and felt something in me go still. Private rehearsal for what? She blinked. For the fall community showcase. I assumed Claire had explained. "No," I said. She had not. Mara shifted her grip on the folder. "I may be overstepping. He was only there briefly. She stopped choosing words with care. "He looked like he wasn't sure what he was allowed to say. And when I saw you in the office, I realized maybe everybody wasn't working from the same information." For a second, I could not answer. I could see her mouth moving, could hear the distant slap of a car door somewhere farther down the lot. But the sentence had gone ahead of me and left me trying to catch up to it. "Yesterday," I said finally. "Sunday." She nodded once. "And Claire was there." "Yes." "And..." Again that slight pause. "Another man." I assumed her partner, Greg Hale. I had met him 3 times, once in my kitchen, once at a restaurant Claire chose because it had Edison bulbs and small expensive plates, once in her driveway, while he carried in a rolled-up rug and called me sir in that cheerful, polished way men do when they want to seem respectful without becoming vulnerable. "What kind of rehearsal?" I asked. "Just a placement session, really. Kids rotating through short numbers. Nothing formal yet." Placement session. There was that kind of language again. Clean and administrative on the outside. Strange in the mouth of an 8-year-old boy who still needed reminders to put socks on before shoes. "He's not in any showcase I know about," I said. Mara's face changed then, not dramatically. Just enough. Enough for me to know she had come to the same conclusion I had, and maybe sooner. She touched the edge of the folder. "I'm sorry." It was the second apology I had received in under 20 minutes from women who knew something about my grandson's life I did not. "Did he seem all right?" I asked. That question came out more quietly than I intended. Mara answered just as quietly. He seemed careful. Careful, not scared, not upset, not thrilled. Careful. I thanked her because I am a man from a generation that thanks people even while they are handing us things we did not want to know. Then I drove home with the heater too high and the steering wheel cold at the top where the sun had not reached it yet. The house met me the way it always did when I came back alone after taking Eli somewhere. Too still at first, then gradually full of the sounds I had missed while I was gone. Refrigerator, hum. One tick in the baseboard pipe near the den. The clock over the pantry pushing the minute hand forward, like time was not interested in anyone's private humiliation. I hung my coat in the front hall and saw for the first time that Eli's drawing from 2 weeks ago was no longer taped to the side of the bookcase. The one of a crooked yellow house with blue windows and 3 stick figures, one big one, medium, one small. He had drawn June too, though he had not known how to draw dead people, so he put her in the upstairs window holding what looked like a flower and said very matter-of-factly, "That's Grandma still being here." The tape mark remained. The drawing did not. I stood looking at the blank square of wood where it had been and told myself Claire had probably moved it when she tidied. The problem with the first signs of wrongness is how easily they can be given manners. You can explain almost anything once. Twice if you love the people involved. 5 times if grief has taught you to fear conflict more than exclusion. I made myself coffee I did not want and sat at the kitchen table with my phone in my hand. I called Claire. Straight to voicemail. I did not leave a message the first time. I called again 5 minutes later and left one then plain and calm. "Claire, it's Dad. The school said Eli was withdrawn 2 weeks ago and Ms. Bell says he was at rehearsal yesterday. Call me back." I listened to my own voice after the beep and heard how carefully neutral it was. Not because I felt neutral, because I had already begun preparing myself to be the reasonable one. June used to hear that tone from 3 rooms away. "Tom," she would say, not unkindly, "you only sound that calm when you're trying to keep from naming something." There are some sentences that remain alive long after the speaker is gone. They keep working on you from inside. I carried my coffee into the front parlor and stood by the piano. The room smelled faintly of dust warmed by sun and the lemon oil June used on the wood. Her framed photograph still sat on the top shelf, not the formal one from our 40th anniversary, but a smaller picture Helen had taken at a summer picnic. June laughing off to the side, not even looking at the camera, one hand up as if she were telling somebody to stop making trouble and knowing perfectly well they were going to keep making it. Eli used to call this room Grandma June's music room. He had called it that since he was 4. I do not know why that fact came to me then. Maybe because of Mara, maybe because the word rehearsal had already moved into the room ahead of me and changed the light around the piano. I crossed to the bench and opened the lid. Inside were June's old beginner books, a stack of sheet music clipped together with a faded ribbon and the stub of a pencil she kept tucked in the hinge gap because she was forever marking keys for little fingers. On the top book in her square hand, she had written Eli's Starters, as if he were a horse being gently brought along, and she meant to get him used to music the way country people get young animals used to touch. I sat there longer than I intended, my coffee cooling on the side table, and remembered the first time she tried to show him middle C. He had hit 3 wrong notes, announced the piano was too many sounds at once, and then banged both fists down just to hear the whole house complain. June had laughed so hard she had to wipe her eyes. "You can tell when a child feels safe," she'd said afterward once he had run off to the backyard, "by how wrong he's willing to sing." At the time, it was one of those little wise things she dropped into the day without asking to be remembered. Standing there in the parlor with private rehearsals sitting in my mind like a splinter, I felt the sentence change shape. By noon, Claire still had not called. I drove to her place after lunch because I could not sit with the house any longer, pretending it had not started to shift under me. Claire lived 10 minutes away in a newer subdivision where all the mailboxes stood at the same height and the porches looked staged for people who drank more white wine outdoors than anyone I knew. Her driveway held her SUV and Greg's dark sedan. The garage door was halfway open. Through the gap, I could see storage bins, a folded stroller. Somebody had probably given them rather than one they had ever needed, and one long cardboard box leaning against the wall. Claire opened the door with her phone in one hand and her smile already in place. "Dad, I was just about to call you." Of course she was. "Were you?" She widened the door. "Come in." The house smelled like citrus cleaner and one of those candles designed to suggest expensive calm. Eli's shoes were by the entry bench, but not the sneakers he wore to school. Soft black slip-ons I had never seen before. Claire looked beautiful in the way she always had when she decided appearance would be one more thing she controlled before it could disappoint her. Hair neat, sweater clean-lined and pale. Earrings small and exact. She had June's mouth, and none of June's softness in it. "I'm sorry about this morning," she said with that practiced brightness again. "I genuinely thought I'd texted you the update." "What update?" She exhaled very lightly, as if bracing herself for someone else's slowness. "We've been exploring alternatives for Eli. Just transitional ones. Some private instruction, some arts programming, some schedule adjustments. Nothing dramatic. The school says you withdrew him 2 weeks ago." "Yes. Because we're in a transition." There was that word again, laid down so cleanly it sounded almost hygienic. "You did not tell me." "I know. I should have." "That's on me." It was skillful, the apology. Broad enough to signal reasonableness, narrow enough to concede almost nothing. "Why was he at rehearsal yesterday?" I asked. Her face stayed composed, but I saw the flicker there. Not guilt. Calculation, a fast interior sorting of what I knew and what I did not. "Mara said something to you?" "She did." Claire nodded slowly, as if Mara had confirmed an inconvenience rather than exposed a fact. "We're trying out some things," she said. "Greg has connections with the community showcase people. It's good exposure, it's structured, and Eli responds really well to goal-oriented environments." I looked at her. "He's 8. "Yes," she said, still patient. "And he's very bright." "That doesn't answer the question." "It does, Dad. You just don't like the answer." Behind her, I could see part of the living room. New throw pillows, a low white shelf, a framed black and white photograph of Claire, Greg, and Eli on some outdoor walkway. All three smiling the same tidy smile people get when a photographer says the word candid 3 times and nobody believes it. No photograph of June anywhere. No surprise there. Still, it struck me. "Is he here?" I asked. Claire glanced toward the back of the house. "He's in his room finishing a worksheet." "Can I see him?" "Of course." The speed of the answer slowed me more than resistance would have. She led me down the hall. The room he used there had a bedspread the color of oatmeal and shelves with books arranged by height. There was a cork board over the desk with a schedule pinned in color blocks. Monday in blue, Tuesday in green. Several squares marked practice coaching enrichment. I could feel myself looking too hard and tried to stop. Eli looked up from the desk. "Grandpa." His face lit, but only for a second before he glanced past me toward Claire. That glance hurt more than I can say plainly. "Hey, pal," I said. "How's the worksheet?" "Fine." "What kind of language?" He used to say reading. I stepped farther into the room and saw half-zipped on the chair beside the desk a blue garment bag with white stitching near the top. I did not stare long enough to read it fully then, only enough to know there were initials on it, and one of the letters was not W. Claire said, "We're trying to help him find things that fit him better." I turned back to her. "Fit him better than what, Dad?" Her tone warmed further, which meant danger with Claire more than coldness ever did. "You know I'm not criticizing the past, but he's changing. He needs different structures now." Eli lowered his eyes to the worksheet. Something in the room had gone careful again. "All right," I said. "The next time you tell me before the school does." Claire held my gaze. "Fair. Fair." I stayed 6 more minutes, maybe 7. Just long enough to ask Eli about lunch and be told it was fine. Just long enough to notice the framed photo on his desk was of him and Greg at a batting cage. While the picture I had given Claire last Christmas, the one of Eli at June's piano grinning up at her, was nowhere I could see. Just long enough to begin feeling ridiculous for noticing things at all. When I left, Claire walked me to the front door with that same smooth composure. "I know this feels abrupt," she said, "but some of the old routines aren't really right for him anymore." I looked at her, then really looked. There are moments a face rearranges a whole memory behind it. I do not mean she suddenly looked like a villain. Life is not that helpful. She looked like my daughter, intelligent, tired, competent, determined. But for the first time, I could see the shape of something I had mistaken over and over for maturity. It was correction. She was forever correcting the emotional temperature of a room until it matched what she could bear. I drove back to my house with the afternoon light falling sideways over the dash and a headache pressing just behind my left eye. At home, the silence felt less companionable than it had that morning. Not loud, just altered. As if every room had shifted its weight slightly and was waiting to see whether I would notice. In the front hall, Eli's red raincoat still hung on the lower hook from the storm 2 Thursdays earlier. I reached to straighten it and found beneath it on the floor by the bench his blue spelling folder. He must have left it in the truck after all. I picked it up and opened it. Inside were the usual pages. Word lists, one drawing in the margin of a cat with 6 legs. But tucked into the back pocket was a glossy half-sheet from the Community Arts Center downtown. Autumn Showcase Placement Weekend. Children's Movement. Introductory tap featured ensemble assessment. My thumb stopped on the word tap. I stood there in the front hall with the folder open, my coat still on, and heard June's piano room in the back of the house holding its breath. That evening, Claire texted finally. "Sorry again about the confusion this morning. I should have communicated better. He's in a transition and some old labels are confusing him. We'll talk tomorrow." Some old labels. I read the message twice, then a third time. By 7, Eli was dropped off for his Thursday dinner with me because apparently some old routines were still useful when Claire had somewhere else to be. Greg's sedan pulled away before I even got to the porch. Claire had work, she said in the text. Greg would do the handoff. Eli came in carrying the blue garment bag and his backpack, the garment bag held carefully away from his body so it wouldn't wrinkle. "Why do you have that?" I asked before I could stop myself. He looked down at it. "Practice clothes." "Practice for what?" He hesitated, then glanced past me toward the parlor. "Just practice." I took his backpack while he slipped off his shoes. Black socks, neat cuffs. He looked like a child who had been dressed for a version of himself I had not agreed to. I made spaghetti because Thursday was spaghetti. The sauce had simmered all afternoon. June's way. With a little sugar and the celery cooked down soft enough to disappear, Eli sat at the kitchen table swinging one leg, and for a few minutes things almost found their old shape again. He asked for grated cheese. He drank too much milk too fast. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand until I slid him a napkin and he rolled his eyes. Then he took 2 bites and said, "I can't eat too much on practice week." I set down my fork. "Practice week," I said. He nodded, looking into the bowl. "What practice week is this, Eli?" He twisted the napkin in his hands. "The showcase thing. Nobody told me about that." He was quiet. "Did your mom say not to tell me no?" "Too fast." I leaned back in the chair. The kitchen seemed to sharpen around us. The clock above the pantry, the small brown scratch on the cabinet where June had once dropped a cast-iron lid, the folded towel by the sink. Details rose up when I needed them least, as if the house were trying to hold me steady by naming itself. "All right," I said, careful again. "Then tell me now." Eli looked toward the doorway, toward the back of the house, toward the parlor. "They're helping me get ready," he said finally. "For what?" He searched for the phrase, and when it came polished. "For a better fit." I have never in my life wanted my wife alive more than I did then. Not for comfort, for witness. June would have heard what was wrong in that sentence before the last word left his mouth. I got up to clear the bowls because my hands needed somewhere to go. Eli asked, "Can I do a little practice?" Practice what? He slid off the chair. Just the routine. Routine. Another adult word wearing a child's face. He picked up the blue garment bag and moved toward the parlor before I could answer. I followed him, not quickly, but not slowly either. The room was dark except for the lamp by June's chair and the last wash of evening at the window. The piano sat where it had always sat, black wood holding the room together. Eli stopped in the doorway and looked around. What, I asked. He frowned slightly, then pointed not at the piano, not at June's chair, but just into the room in general. Is it okay if I use the old piano room? The sentence hit harder than the school hallway, harder than the teacher's face, because this was the room. This was the room that had held June's hands, her music, her voice, the first wrong notes Eli was ever allowed to make. This was the room that had never once needed explanation inside this family. I heard Claire before I saw her. Her heels on the porch, then the front door opening behind us. She must have come back for something Greg forgot to send in. Her voice floated down the hall light and composed. That was your old name for that room, sweetheart. She came to the doorway, smiling, car keys in hand, not even out of breath. We just call it the piano room now. Eli looked from her to me. And in that small, tidy correction with the house listening, I finally felt the true shape of what had entered my family while I was busy trying to keep peace. I do not know what showed on my face in that doorway. I know what I felt. Not rage. Rage would have been easier. Rage has weight and direction. This was something colder and more humiliating than that. It was the feeling of hearing your own family history revised in a room that had once needed no translation. Claire smiled at Eli the way mothers smile when they are making something easier for a child. Go ahead, she said. But just for a few minutes. Greg's waiting. Eli nodded and carried the blue garment bag to the piano bench with both hands. He did not look at me again before he set it down. That hurt, too, not because he was afraid of me, because he was managing me. I stepped aside so he could pass. Claire was still in the doorway with the car keys looped over one finger. Dad, can I talk to you for a second? She said it softly, the way people do when they want softness to count as authority. I followed her back into the front hall. Behind us, I could hear the faint zip of the garment bag opening and the delicate bump of the piano bench being moved not by Eli's usual graceless shove, but carefully, as if he had been taught to treat the room as a venue instead of a place where he belonged. That was unnecessary, I said. Claire blinked once. What was? You know what. She drew a breath through her nose and lowered her voice, not out of shame, but because lowering it helped her shape the scene. Dad, he's trying to get used to some new structures. If we keep every old name and every old ritual exactly intact, it gets confusing for him. The room was not confusing for him. He's 8. Yes, and he's moving between households, school options, activities, adults. You cannot expect everything to stay static just because... She stopped before she said, because your wife died, or because you miss your wife, or because this house still answers to her. She did not need to finish. I heard the whole sentence anyway. Just because what I said. Claire looked tired for half a second, and in another life, in a kinder family version, maybe I would have gone easy then. But tiredness was one of her best costumes. She wore it whenever she needed her choices to seem like the burden of competence. Just because it's familiar to you, she said. To you, not to him. That landed where it was meant to. In the parlor behind us, Eli made a small tapping sound. Not on the keys, on the hardwood floor. 2 quick little beats and then a pause. I turned toward the sound before I could stop myself. Claire said, "He's excited about this, Dad." For what? The showcase. He's 8. She gave me a look that said I had already made that point and would be permitted the dignity of not making it twice. You make it sound like he's joining the ballet, she said. It's a children's community program, movement music confidence. He likes it. Then why keep it from me? I didn't keep it from you. I failed to update you. The phrase was clean as a tile floor. Failed to update you. Like our family existed in some shared software, and I was the only device not syncing right. Behind us came another soft tapping sound. I could hear how careful Eli was being not to thump too hard in June's room. He used to thunder through that room in sock feet like a colt on linoleum. June loved it. She used to say children who only moved politely were either unhappy or being watched too closely. I realized then that I had not once heard Eli laugh since he came in the house. Claire touched my sleeve light enough to look affectionate if anyone had been there to see it. I really don't want to do this in front of him. Do what? That was the question. Argue. Name something. Refuse correction. I pulled my arm away without making a show of it. Then you should have thought about that before you told him the room had the wrong name. For the first time, something flared under her calm. It was not the wrong name, she said. It was an old name. There it was again, not denial. Replacement. A child outgrows a sweater. A family outgrows an old name. A widow outgrows a period of grief. Everything tidy in the mouth, everything deadly in the lived version. Greg's horn gave a brief, polite beep from the driveway. Claire turned toward the sound. I have to go. Of course she did. That was part of the power, too. She was always moving on to the next useful thing while I was left standing in the room the sentence had altered. When is he coming back? I asked. She checked her watch, though she already knew. 45 minutes. For what kind of practice? Tap and ensemble orientation. I looked at her. She said, You don't have to make that face. I don't know what face I'm making. Yes, you do. She went back into the parlor, and I followed because I could not have stayed where I was and let her move through June's room alone. Eli was kneeling by the piano bench, one hand on the edge of the open garment bag. I saw black leather inside. The shape was too unmistakable now to pretend otherwise. Ready, Buddy? Claire asked brightly. Eli nodded and zipped the bag shut. He looked at me then, finally. I'll be back. 45 minutes, I said. Claire answered for him. That's the plan. The plan. Another phrase that stripped all the soft tissue off family and left only schedule. I crouched to straighten Eli's collar mostly so I could be close enough to say something only he could hear. You all right? He nodded too quickly. You can tell me if you're tired. I'm not tired. Okay. He leaned in and kissed my cheek because that was still ours, apparently. Then he stepped back and took the garment bag. The front door closed. Their voices thinned across the porch. The car started. Gravel shifted under tires. Then the house was still again, but not with the same stillness. I stood in the parlor listening to the space they had just left. The silence after children go is usually soft around the edges. This one wasn't. This one had corners. June's chair sat by the lamp with the Afghan folded over one arm. The piano lid was still up from where I had opened it earlier. The room looked like itself, and yet I could not shake the feeling that something had been done to it in plain sight. Not broken, not stolen. Corrected. I lowered the piano lid and heard my own breath in the room. Then I went back to the front hall, picked up Eli's backpack and carried it to the kitchen table. I tell you that now, because it was the first thing I did that was not merely emotional. It was the first thing that had intention in it. Not snooping, I told myself, just looking. A grandfather has the right to know what weekday life looks like for the boy he still wakes up and feeds breakfast to. That is what I said to myself while I unzipped the front compartment. Inside were 2 pencils, the spelling folder, 1 crumpled tissue, a half-pack of fruit snacks, and a folded paper with Community Arts Center printed across the top. I flattened it on the table. It was not much. A standard release form, emergency contact fields, a place for guardian signature, most of it blank and photocopied gray. But the bottom line had already been completed in careful blue ink. Child participant name Eli Hale. Not Whitaker. Hale. I sat down without meaning to. The kitchen seemed to pull a little farther away from me, like one of those dreams where a room stretches as you walk through it. The sugar bowl, the folded dish towel, the chipped clock over the pantry, all of it still there, all of it suddenly less solid than paper. I looked again to make sure I had read it right. Eli Hale. It would have been easier almost if it had been a clerical abbreviation, some dumb assumption made by a volunteer who saw the mother's partner at pickup and filled in the obvious modern arrangement. That was the explanation I reached for first, because people reach for the least painful version before they reach for the true one. I picked the form up and turned it over. On the back, in a different hand, was a schedule grid. Saturday placement, Sunday rehearsal slot, Wednesday movement lab, showcase ensemble pending, nothing about school, nothing about district withdrawal, nothing about why the grandmother's music room needed a new name. I stared at the paper until the coffee in my stomach started to feel sour. Then I folded it back exactly the way I had found it and put it where it had been. That detail matters to me. I was not yet ready to let anybody know I had crossed from unease into attention. By the time they came back, I was standing at the sink, peeling carrots I did not need for any meal I planned to make. I heard Greg's car first, then Eli's quick steps on the porch, then Claire's laugh, small controlled, already pointed away from the house. Eli came in flushed and smelling faintly of outside air rubber floor mats and something sweeter I could not place until later. Hairspray, very light. Not enough for an adult to notice if he wasn't listening with grief. "Hi," he said too brightly. "How was orientation?" He glanced toward the open front door where Claire was still talking to Greg in low tones. "Fine. Fine what?" He shrugged and pulled off his jacket. The smell came stronger then. Powdery, stage adjacent. Not theatrical, just enough to make an ordinary child seem briefly borrowed from somewhere artificial. He started toward the bathroom. Claire entered the house behind him. "All set," she said. "Did they fit?" Claire looked at me as if I had asked about his blood type. "What?" "The shoes." Her face stayed neutral. "Yes." I nodded once. "Good to know." She smiled, but the smile did not touch her eyes. "Dad, I need you not to make this weird." "Weird?" I almost laughed, then not because anything was funny, but because I could hear June in my head say, "She always loves people hardest when she's arranging them." The sentence came back so clearly, I turned my head half stupidly toward the staircase, as if June might have said it from above. The first time she'd spoken, it had been after one Thanksgiving years earlier. Claire was in her 20s, not yet married, still making everything she touched look like a magazine spread. She'd arranged place cards for our own family dinner, ironed cloth napkins nobody asked for, corrected the angle of the centerpiece 3 times, then spent half the evening fixing the way everyone sat in photographs. Later, while washing wine glasses, June had said it softly, almost to herself. She always loves people hardest when she's arranging them. At the time, I took it for a mother's gentle complaint. In the kitchen that night, with Eli's jacket hanging open by the hall and the arts center form hidden again in his backpack, the sentence turned sharp. Claire left 5 minutes later. I do not remember what reason she gave for the rush. Something about an early meeting, something about Greg waiting. The details blur because by then I had begun listening to everything 2 ways the surface meaning and the weight beneath it. After she was gone, Eli took his bath, or what passed for a bath when you are 8 and feel personally wronged by soap. I read to him from the chapter book we were halfway through. He laughed once at a line that deserved it, but even the laugh came with a glance afterward, quick and involuntary, as if checking whether he had done childhood correctly. When I tucked him into bed in the small room off the hall, the room that had once held Claire's school trophies and then became Eli's on overnights after June got sick, I looked around more carefully than I ever had before. The white shelf by the window used to hold a clay dinosaur, a framed photograph of Eli and June at the piano, and 3 matchbox cars missing wheels. Tonight the dinosaur was there. The cars were there. The photograph was gone. In its place sat a little acrylic frame with one of those school portrait proofs tucked into it. Eli, in a blue shirt, chin-lifted smile, controlled eyes, already trying to cooperate with the occasion. "Where's the picture of you and Grandma?" I asked lightly. He was pulling the blanket up to his chin. "Mom said that one was getting bent, so she took it home." "No." "Then where is it?" He frowned. "I don't know. Do you want it back in here?" His fingers found the blanket edge and pinched it. "It doesn't really fit the room now." I did not answer immediately. If I had, I do not trust what my voice would have done. "What do you mean it doesn't fit?" He looked at me, then, already regretting the phrase, because some part of him knew it did not belong to him. Just because. Because why? He rolled onto one side away from me. "I'm sleepy." I sat on the bed a few seconds longer than usual. The room smelled like clean sheets and the faint plasticky sweetness of the new lamp Claire had bought last month. Nothing wrong with the lamp, nothing wrong with clean sheets, nothing wrong with a mother taking a bent frame out of a child's room. One explanation at a time, every piece could be smoothed. That is how denial survives. It lives on single facts, never patterns. I leaned over and kissed the top of his head. "Good night, pal." Night. At the door, I turned off the lamp and stood a moment in the hall. The house had settled into its nighttime language. Pipe tick, floorboard complaint, refrigerator hum below. But there was something else in it now, too. A draft of misalignment. Like one note in a chord had been replaced, and my body heard it before my mind could identify which one. I slept badly. At 3:15 I woke because I thought I had heard June tapping the piano wood twice. Not a ghost sound, not something supernatural, just memory sliding too close to the edge of sleep. I lay there listening to the dark house, hearing nothing but my own pulse and the thin rain that had started sometime after midnight. In the morning, Eli was quieter than usual. He ate toast standing up. He did not ask for jam. He said he needed his blue bag, not the garment bag, but a different small duffel I had not seen before, and when I found it by the mudroom bench, I noticed the stitched initials on the side. E.H. I stood there holding it while he searched for his left shoe. "Where'd this come from?" He glanced over. "Practice. That's the second practice bag I've seen in 24 hours. He shrugged. I touched the stitched letters with my thumb. Navy thread on blue canvas, not loud, not accidental either. "Why are your initials different?" He looked down at his shoe. "Mom said it's simpler." "For who?" He did not answer. I almost asked, simpler than what? Simpler than your grandmother's family. Simpler than your own name. Simpler than reminding a new household that you came from somewhere else first. But he was 8 years old and tying the same lace knot 3 times because his fingers were still small and his mind was somewhere I could no longer follow easily. So I let it go. That was what I was still doing then, letting each thing go separately even while they had already begun joining hands behind my back. He went home before lunch. Claire texted around 11 that she needed to keep him with her the rest of the weekend because of program flow. Another phrase I would not have believed any child needed in his life until I heard it applied to mine. I wrote back, "Fine." Then, because fine was a coward's word and I knew it, I sent another message. "Need the school paperwork details, also the rehearsal schedule. He still has school materials here." She did not answer for 2 hours. In those 2 hours, I did something I had not done since June's funeral week. I went into her sewing room. It was on the second floor at the end of the hall, the room with the slanted ceiling and the small dormer window that looked out over Helen Doyle's side yard. June had hemmed dresses in there, patched Eli's knee tears, mended my shirts, with the kind of invisible stitches that made me feel every time as though being loved could happen quietly enough to miss unless you turned the fabric over and looked hard. After she died, I had kept the room neat but mostly closed, not sealed off in some dramatic shrine way. I was not that man, but I did not disturb it much. The boxes stayed labeled. Her tin of buttons stayed on the shelf. The cedar chest stayed under the window with the old recital costumes folded inside from when Claire used to do school music nights and church pageants. That last detail did not mean anything to me until that Saturday. The room smelled exactly as it had always smelled. Cedar dry cloth, a trace of machine oil from the old singer. I stood in the doorway long enough to let the air work on me. Then I went in and opened the chest. Inside were tissue-wrapped costumes, hand-labeled envelopes. June's measuring tape coiled like something sleeping, and a stack of old programs held together with a rubber band gone brittle with age. I sat on the floor and untied them. Claire at 9 in a paper star crown. Claire at 11 in black flats for a winter chorus concert. Claire at 13 in a little red vest for some community musical whose name I no longer remembered. June's pencil marks in the margins. Hem taken 1/2 inch. Add hook. Claire hates this collar. There is a kind of heartbreak that comes not from finding something new, but from having something old become evidence. I found tucked into one of the programs a page torn from June's notepad. No revelation, no hidden accusation, just a list in her square hand. Pack bobby pins. Don't let Claire skip supper. Tell Tom to bring flowers after. Remember, she gets too stiff if she feels watched. I read that last line 3 times. She gets too stiff if she feels watched. It hit me with embarrassing force. Not because it was dramatic, because it was ordinary enough to be true. June had seen it years ago. Claire did not bloom under feeling. She performed under scrutiny and tightened under love she could not direct. I sat there on the sewing room floor with old programs around me and understood something I should have understood earlier. Performance was never new in our family. What was new was what Claire had chosen to do with it. My phone buzzed in my pocket and made me jump. It was Mara Bell. Mr. Whitaker, I'm sorry to bother you on a Saturday. Could you call when you have a minute? Quietly, if possible. Quietly, if possible. I looked around the sewing room as if someone in the house might overhear, though I was alone. Even alone, the phrase worked on me. It made the day feel partitioned. I called her back from the room with the door half shut. She answered on the second ring. Thank you. I know this is awkward. What is? I wanted to be careful about voicemail. Her voice was lower than before, professionally measured, but tighter now. I could hear distant piano scales behind her, probably another student somewhere in the building. Tell me, I said. She let out a breath. I checked something after I saw you yesterday. What? The community roster. I only did it because I was worried I'd misunderstood. I sat down on June's old sewing chair. And Eli is listed for preliminary ensemble evaluation under Hale household registration. There was the phrase again this time with bureaucratic bones on it. I found a scanned registration note in the system, she said carefully. I'm probably not supposed to have spent as long with it as I did, but there was a line about maintaining continuity across blended home presentation, and it struck me. Maintaining continuity across blended home presentation. I closed my eyes. Ms. Bell Mara is fine. Mara, what does that mean? I can't fully say because I don't know what was discussed privately, but the language suggested they're trying to standardize how Eli is introduced and presented across activities. Presented. Another word from the performance world. Another clean word, another blade, and you're telling me this why? There was a pause long enough that I thought she might not answer. Then she said, because when I saw him on Sunday, I asked him if he still played around on the piano at your house. He looked at the floor before he answered, and then he said, not like before. My hand tightened on the arm of June's chair. Kids grow out of things, I said, hearing myself reach again for the easier story, even as it collapsed in my mouth. Yes, Mara said gently. They do, but they don't usually answer music questions like they're checking whether the answer still matches their household. I did not speak. She went on quieter now. I may be wrong about the scale of this. I want to be honest about that. But I don't think you're dealing with a simple scheduling mix-up. The sentence landed with more force than anything she'd said before because it was so careful. Not melodrama, not rescue, just the removal of one false explanation. I thanked her. She apologized again. We hung up. For a long minute I stayed in the sewing room with the phone loose in my hand and June's program stack on my lap. Through the dormer window I could see Helen Doyle in her yard shaking out a rug over the porch rail. It occurred to me then that Helen saw more of our driveways than I did. Not in a spying way, in an old neighborhood way. Same window for 30 years, same afternoon bird seed, same front flower boxes. The kind of witness nobody notices until suddenly it matters that they were there all along. I put the programs back in the chest and went downstairs. Helen was still outside when I stepped onto the porch. The air had cleared after the rain. Everything smelled washed and a little metallic like wet leaves and pavement cooling. She looked up from the rug. "You all right, Tommy?" That was how older women asked whether you were falling apart without embarrassing you. "Can I ask you something?" She clipped the rug over the rail and dusted her hands. "That sounds serious." "It might be nothing. Those are usually the ones that are something." I went down the steps and stood at the edge of the walk. The distance between our porches was not large, but at that moment it felt right not to shout this kind of question across it. "You happen to notice Claire's car much this week?" Helen looked at me over the tops of her glasses. "That depends on whether you're asking as a neighbor or as a man who already suspects I notice everybody's car. I'm asking as a grandfather." Her face changed. "Not alarm, attention." "What kind of notice?" "Pickups, drop-offs, anything odd." She thought about it without pretending not to. I appreciated that. "Well," she said slowly, "she's been in and out more than usual. Not always at school times. Wednesday she came by about 4:30 and sat in the driveway 10 minutes before taking him back out. Thursday, too, with Eli." "Yes, did you see where they went?" She gave me a dry little smile. "Tommy, I do have limits." I almost smiled back. "Almost. Anything else?" Helen hesitated. Then she looked down at her hands, rubbed one thumb over the other and said, "You're not gonna like this. I already don't." She changed his shoes in the back seat once. The sentence hit strangely. So small, so bodily specific. "When?" "Wednesday, I think. Maybe Thursday." He climbed in, wearing regular sneakers. She opened the rear door, leaned halfway in, and after a minute, he stepped out, 1 foot at a time in black shoes. Not dress shoes. Dance shoes, maybe. I only noticed because he had trouble balancing, and I thought he might fall into the street. I stood very still. She saw me at the window. Helen went on and waved like there was nothing in the world to explain. What else? Nothing definite. She looked at me then, direct as a nail-head. But he looked tired, Tom. That word again. Not scared, not bruised, not miserable enough to mobilize the world. Just tired. It may still be nothing I said and heard how false it sounded even to me. Helen nodded once, kindly enough, not to call me a liar. Maybe. I went back inside and found that the house had changed again while I was on the porch. Or maybe I had. The front hall seemed narrower, the hooks by the radiator, the raincoat, Eli's little paper pumpkin taped crooked near the door. Everything now looked capable of meaning more than itself. That afternoon I started a pile on the mudroom desk. Not a dramatic investigator's board, just a pile. School note. Arts Center form copied from memory onto a legal pad. Times, phrases, Eli Hale. Program flow, transition, better fit, old name for that room. Writing them down steadied me. It also made me sick. At 6:30, Claire finally answered my earlier text. "We're working with a few advisors and trying to create consistency. Please don't make this adversarial. Advisors." Consistency. Adversarial. I stared at the message and thought for the first time Claire has already been speaking to other adults about this in a language designed to position me. I typed back, "Who are the advisors?" No answer. At 7:15, my nephew Daniel called. He was not my son, but he was the closest thing I had to one after June died, and Claire moved farther and farther into her own professionally arranged orbit. Daniel was 42, family law attorney in Cincinnati, too measured to be impulsive and too decent to enjoy being right about family trouble. Claire liked him in public and avoided him in private, which should have told me something years earlier. "Uncle Tom," he said. "You free?" "I am now. You sound bad. I've had a worse Friday than I expected. It's Saturday." I looked at the dark window over the sink and realized I had lost an entire day to the house. "Right," I said. He let that pass. "Claire called me Wednesday." That sat between us for half a second. "What about?" She phrased it as a hypothetical, asked broad questions about educational flexibility, family transitions, and how much informal grandparent involvement complicates household consistency. The language was so close to her text, it made my stomach turn. "What did you tell her?" "That hypothetical people usually ask those questions after they've already made decisions." I sat down at the kitchen table. And she did not like that answer. I told him then. Not every feeling, just the facts. School withdrawal, Mara, the roster language, the new initials, Helen seeing the shoe change, the room correction. I heard myself speaking more precisely than I had at any point since Monday morning, and I realized that was because Daniel's profession demanded exactness, and some part of me had finally grown tired of sounding emotional enough to be dismissed. When I finished, he was quiet a moment. Then he said, "This is not about schooling." No, it might have started there as a pretext. But it isn't there now. What is it? He let out a slow breath. Authorship. I frowned. What? Who gets to write the child? Who gets to decide the terms he'll answer to, what structure defines him, what prior attachments are treated as essential, and which ones are reclassified as sentimental or disruptive? The words were legal enough to annoy me and human enough to wound me. "You think that's what she's doing?" "I think that's what it sounds like from here." I looked toward the parlor. The lamp by June's chair was on because I had turned it on at dusk without thinking, same as always. "She's his mother," I said. "Yes. I'm not trying to take him from her. I know that." "Then what exactly am I supposed to do?" Daniel's voice dropped slightly. "First, stop treating this like she forgot to mention an after-school program. Second, write everything down. Dates, names, phrases, documents. Third, don't confront her in a way that lets her recast you as reactive." I closed my eyes. "She already has, hasn't she?" A pause. "I think Daniel said carefully that she has begun describing you as emotionally fixed in an older version of things." Older version of things. There was no cruelty in Daniel's voice when he said it. That almost made it worse. Did she use those words? Not exactly, but near enough. Yes. I pressed my thumb into the edge of the table until it hurt. Jesus. Uncle Tom. Don't Uncle Tom me. All right. I swallowed. Sorry. It's fine. No, I said. It isn't. The kitchen clock ticked once. Then again. Daniel said, "You need more than instinct now. You need paper. You need witness. If there's a roster, I want the roster. If there's a school form, I want the school form. If there are texts, schedules, invoices, bags with initials, all of it matters." I looked at the mudroom desk where my little pile had begun to tilt against the lamp base. And if I'm overreacting, then the papers will show that too. That was the moment I crossed some invisible line in myself. Not into certainty. Into obligation. There is a difference. We hung up close to 8. I did not sleep much that night either. Sunday morning after coffee, I went into the grandson's room with fresh sheets over my arm because the old ones needed washing and because doing something useful inside a house is how I have survived most griefs. The bed was unmade from Friday. One sock under the frame, one comic book face down by the chair. Child mess. Good. Child mess still meant somebody had not yet curated everything. I stripped the sheets, and when I lifted the mattress corner to tuck the fitted one, something slid loose from between the box spring and the wall. Not paper exactly. Cardstock. It landed face down near my shoe. I bent with the sheet still over one shoulder and picked it up. It was a draft recital program. Not printed on the heavy finished stock yet. Just a layout proof on cream paper with edit marks in pencil. Autumn. Showcase Youth Ensemble. Under one section title, I found his name. Eli Hale featured Movement Intake Ensemble, not Whitaker, not even Whitaker Hale, just Hale. Below that, in a smaller italic line, presented with gratitude to the Hale household for support during transition. I read it once, then again, then a third time because disbelief is greedy. It always wants one more look. Support during transition, not mother and partner, not family, household. The paper shook in my hand. Not dramatically, just enough that I had to set it on the bedspread to steady it and read the pencil marks in the margin. Confirm Guardian line before final print. Standardized child intro with updated home designation. Updated home designation. That was what did it. Not just the name. Not just the public thanks. The phrase. The clinical neatness of it. The fact that somewhere some adult had written this as part of organizing a child's appearance in the world, and Claire had either approved it or failed to object to it. I sat down hard on the mattress. The room seemed to recede around the paper. The acrylic school portrait on the shelf. The dinosaur. The little lamp. The neatness. The absence of the bent piano photograph. Every object suddenly belonged to an argument I had not known the house was losing. I looked at the bed where Eli slept and felt the first clean break in my old story. This was not alternative schooling. This was not scheduling chaos. This was not one overwhelmed mother forgetting to update her father. This was a system, and the performance was not a side activity. It was the public face of whatever private rewrite had already begun. I sat there with the program on the bed and heard from the front of the house the old piano wood settling in the morning light. It made one small sound. Not music. Just a shift in the grain as the room warmed. But I heard it like a warning. The piano wood made that small, settling sound again, and I sat on the bed with the draft program in my hand, and understood that the house had stopped merely holding memory and started testifying against me. Not against Claire, against me. Against what I had let myself believe while all this was happening in pieces small enough to excuse. I stayed in Eli's room longer than I should have, the fresh sheet half tucked under the mattress, the cream paper lying on the quilt, where a child ought to have been jumping readings, sulking anything but being publicly reformatted by adults with phrases like updated home designation. Sun from the window caught the acrylic school portrait and flattened his face into something neat and generic. Behind it on the wall, there was still a pale rectangle where the old piano photograph had hung. I had seen that square before and named it tidying. Now it looked like removal. I finished making the bed because leaving a task undone in a room like that would have broken something in me. Then I carried the program downstairs and laid it on the mudroom desk beside the arts center, formed the legal pad, and June's old black ballpoint pen, the one that always dragged a little at the top of the page before the ink committed. The desk had once been where grocery lists lived. Car insurance renewals, dry cleaning tickets, the ordinary paper clutter of a house that expected more life, not less. By that Sunday noon it had become something else. Not a detective station, nothing theatrical. A place where the lie kept leaving fingerprints because it assumed I would never look closely enough to see them. I called Daniel. He listened without interrupting while I read him the lines off the program draft. I could hear keyboard clicks on his end and once the faint sound of a chair rolling across office flooring. When I finished, he let out a slow breath. "Do you still have the document?" "Yes. Do not hand it back to anyone. It was hidden in Eli's room." "Good," he said. That gives us clean possession. Us. Yes, Uncle Tom. Us. I sat down at the desk. The house around me was bright and indecently normal. Refrigerator humming, furnace not yet turned on for the season, a car passing outside. The sort of sounds that let people keep believing nothing serious can be happening in daylight. What now, I asked. Now I need you to stop talking to Claire as if you are trying to win clarity from her. Clarity is not your next goal. What is? Preservation. The word landed differently than all the others had. Transition, consistency, presentation, they belonged to Claire's world. Preservation belonged to mine. To June's too. Preservation of what? Documents, messages, dates, language, witness impressions, anything that shows this is not one misunderstanding but a pattern. I looked at the paper again. Eli Hale, presented with gratitude to the Hale household. I want the school withdrawal paperwork. You may not get it directly today. I am his grandfather. You're also the person she's already framing as attached to the old arrangement. That phrase again. Old arrangement. As though June had been a season of furniture. I rubbed my thumb along the paper edge until it bit into the skin. What are you telling me, Daniel? I'm telling you that if Claire has already begun speaking in standardization language to programs and maybe to the school, you need an outside professional before this becomes your word against a mother presenting as organized and future-focused. Outside professional. I know a guardian ad litem in Columbus who's sober and hard to charm. She doesn't spook easily, and she pays attention to coached language. I can't promise she'd take interest yet, but if I tell her what you've got, she'll know what to watch for. I stared out the mudroom window at the side yard where June used to hang sheets in weather too cool for them because she said autumn made cotton smell more honest. The line was bare now. Do it, I said. He was quiet a moment. You all right? No. Good, he said. And because he knew me, he added, I don't mean that cruelly. I mean, if you still felt all right, I'd be worried you hadn't understood the scale of this. After we hung up, I started making copies. Not on some office machine. On the little all-in-one printer Claire gave me 3 Christmases ago because she said every adult living alone needed a decent scanner, and I had joked that adulthood had found me a little late. There was a dirty kind of irony in feeding her paperwork through that machine now. I copied the draft program. I copied the community arts form from the backpack. I copied the text messages. I wrote times. Monday school office, Mara parking lot. Thursday correction in parlor. Saturday roster call, Helen at window. Daniel confirming inquiry. The act of writing it all down changed me more than I expected. Fear, once listed, begins to acquire shape. It loses some of its fog and gains a spine. By 3 o'clock, the mudroom desk looked less like panic and more like structure. That did not comfort me. It only made the loneliness more exact. I did not hear Claire's car when she arrived. What I heard was the front door open without knocking, and her voice moving through the hall, or like she still believed every threshold in the house answered to her first. Dad. My whole body went cold. I slid the copies beneath an old takeout menu and turned in the desk chair just as she came into the mudroom. She was alone. Camel coat hair pinned back, phone in her hand. Expression composed enough to pass for casual if you had not yet learned the difference between calm and control. I called, she said. My phone was in the kitchen. That's not where you usually keep it. She glanced at the printer. Not the desk first. The printer. That told me more than if she had looked right at the papers. What are you doing? Paying my electric bill. It was a weak lie. We both knew it. She smiled faintly. Dad. I stood, not quickly, not defensively. I had learned enough by then to know that speed could be used against me. The slow body reads as steadier in a conflict. June used to say you could tell who really meant what they were saying by who rushed first. What do you need, Claire? She set her keys down on the shelf by the bench in a little clink that sounded too domestic for the moment. I need us not to let this get uglier than it has to. There was my first real glimpse of how frightening she had become. Not because she raised her voice, not because she threatened anything, because she sounded like a woman pre-managing fallout she believed she had the right to define. How ugly does it have to get, I asked. Her eyes moved past me toward the hall, toward the rest of the house, calculating where sound would travel, who might hear, what rooms were available for what tone. Not in here, she said softly, but I wanted it in there, in the mudroom, among the coats, shoes, copied papers, and school week debris, the place where routines entered and left the house, the place where this whole thing had actually happened. I'm fine right here. Claire gave one tiny nod like a professional acknowledging a client's attachment to a flawed plan. Then I'll say it plainly. You are making this harder for Eli. The line might have worked on me once. Might have opened some old reflex in me to self-correct back down, become useful by becoming smaller. I felt the reflex stir. Then I felt something else rise over it. Not courage. Not yet. Just exhaustion with being governed by that reflex. By taking him to school on Monday, I said, or by noticing he was apparently no longer a student there. Her mouth tightened. This isn't about one school. No, I said. It is not. She crossed one arm over herself and held the opposite elbow. A closed posture, but elegant. Even her defenses had good posture. You don't understand what I'm trying to build for him. The sentence reached back through years. Through every holiday table she had straightened, every photo she had adjusted, every emotion she had pressed flatter so the day would photograph better. I could hear all of it in one line. What are you building, Claire? Stability. At whose expense? She looked at me then directly. At no one's expense. I almost brought the program out from under the menu. Almost. Instead, I said, then why is his name changing on paper? That one got her. Not a dramatic reaction, just the smallest flicker in the eyes, a pause too short to count as one unless you had watched her your whole life. Where did you hear that? I let the question hang. She answered herself. Mara. No, Helen. No. The calm sharpened. Then who? I thought of Daniel's word. Preservation. She did not need to know yet. Not until the right people had seen what I had seen. I know enough, I said. Claire studied my face a long moment. Dad, blended families make practical decisions all the time. Kids use different labels. Programs put things under one household. That doesn't mean there's some dark agenda. Agenda. She had just told me more than she meant to. Nobody uses a word that loaded unless they already feel the outline of accusation in the room. Then, why not tell me? She exhaled through her nose and looked away, a gesture that in a stranger might have read as patience. In Claire, it meant she was choosing whether to spend more honesty than she thought I deserved. Because every time anything shifts, she said, you make it about what it means for the old house. I did not answer. She continued lower now. Eli is growing up. He can't live suspended between your grief and what comes next. There it was. Not the whole truth, but the edge of it. My grief, I said. Yes. And June, her silence answered faster than any speech. I looked at the hooks by the door. Eli's red raincoat, my jacket, June's old umbrella stand. A house can stay in one place and still suddenly feel as if all its objects have been repositioned around a sentence. You think this house is what's holding him back. I think this house keeps asking him to be the same child. The cruelty of it was that part of me instantly searched myself for whether she was right. That was her true weapon. Not domination. Correction. She made you cross-examine your own pain until you supplied half the rope she used. I'm not done being his grandfather just because you remarried your future, I said. Her eyes sharpened on that. I didn't remarry anything. No, I said. You're still rehearsing it. For 1 second, genuine anger crossed her face. Gone almost immediately, but enough. enough for me to know I had finally touched the part beneath tone. Then she smiled again. That frightened me more than the flash of anger had. "I came here to avoid escalation," she said. "Not because I owe you an account of every developmental choice I make." Developmental choice. The room did something inside me then, not the house. Me. A rearrangement. I saw suddenly how long I had been standing in front of my own daughter, waiting for permission to name harm unless it arrived in language rough enough not to be arguable. But her kind of harm did not arrive rough. It arrived improved. "How long?" I asked. She frowned. "What? How long have you been doing this?" The smile thinned. "This is not a useful conversation." "How long?" "Dad, how long?" The third time I asked it, I heard the difference in my own voice. I was no longer asking whether something was wrong. I was asking for a timeline. Claire picked up her keys from the shelf. "I'm not doing this." She stepped past me, and for one moment as she crossed the mudroom threshold, her hand brushed the top of the desk. Not fumbling, not grabbing, feeling. A reconnaissance pass over a surface she wanted to understand without revealing she cared. If I had not seen her hand do it, I might have missed the whole thing. But I saw it, and afterward, I could not unknow how many times in life she had probably done the same in rooms full of people mapping what existed before deciding what version of it should remain. When the front door closed behind her, I locked it. Not because I thought she would come back in. Because the house needed for the first time in months a visible sign that I understood it was no longer neutral ground. That evening, I moved the copies from the mudroom desk into June's sewing room. The choice came to me while I was rinsing a coffee cup and looking at my own reflection in the dark kitchen window. The mudroom was too exposed, too obvious: shoes, coats, open sight lines, front door traffic. The sewing room, on the other hand, had become something else since Saturday. Not just a grief room, an archive, a room where fabric and memory and pattern had always lived together without pretending they were separate trades. I carried the folder upstairs after dark. The room looked different at night. The cedar chest under the window, the little machine lamp throwing a cone of amber over the old singer, the shadow of the dress form in the corner, which in the wrong mood could look like a person waiting, though I was not in the mood for that kind of nonsense. What changed the room was not atmosphere. It was purpose. I cleared a space on the cutting table and laid everything out. Program draft arts form, text printouts, Daniel's notes, my own legal pad chronology. Then I added one more thing from the cedar chest, June's old beginner music book with ELI's starters in pencil on the inside cover. Not as evidence exactly, more as a corrective, a reminder of what had not begun as performance. I stood there with one hand on the table edge and saw, for the first time, that the house now had separate kinds of knowledge in separate rooms. The kitchen knew what had been said. The parlor knew what had been renamed. The grandson's room knew what had been removed. The mudroom knew what had entered and left. The sewing room knew how long some of it had been waiting to be recognized. That realization unsettled me so badly, I had to sit down. Monday morning, I called the school district office. Not to accuse, not to rage, to ask, calm voice, simple questions. I had practiced them while shaving the razor in my hand, and my own face in the mirror looking older than it had any right to after one weekend. The woman who answered transferred me twice. Then I reached a records clerk named Susan, who sounded tired enough to be honest. "I'm trying to understand my grandson's enrollment status," I said. "I was the one who took him to school last Monday." She made a sympathetic sound before she said anything useful, which told me the school story had probably traveled farther than Claire expected. "One moment," she said, and put me on hold. When she came back, her voice was lower. "Mr. Whitaker, I can confirm there is a voluntary withdrawal on file effective the previous Tuesday." "The previous Tuesday," I repeated. "Yes. Tuesday. Not Thursday, when Claire was still dropping Eli at my house with school folders." My grip tightened on the phone. "Could you tell me what documentation supported it?" I can't release the full file without custodial authorization. I'm not asking for the file. I'm asking what kind of documentation. Another pause. Keyboard clicking. It notes transition to private instructional structure, home-based learning coordination and outside enrichment support. There it was. The paper cage around a child. Was any concern raised about family contacts, I asked. I'm sorry, I was taking him to school the following Monday, and no one contacted me. A smaller pause now. The emergency contact list was updated at time of withdrawal, Susan said carefully. Updated, removed or updated. I can only say updated. The room around me. The kitchen this time became sharper. The sugar bowl, the grocery list pinned with a magnet, the little crease in the vinyl floor where June dropped a pot once in 2009 and swore about it for 2 days. All of it vivid in the moment I understood I had not merely been left uninformed. I had been administratively moved. Thank you, I said. You're welcome. She hesitated, then added, Mr. Whitaker. Yes. If there's confusion inside the family, I would encourage you to resolve it quickly. The more adults use different terms around a child, the harder school transitions tend to be. Different terms. Even the school could feel the language problem without knowing its shape. When I hung up, I did not sit down. I walked straight to the mudroom desk, opened my notebook and wrote, Withdrawal effective Tuesday. Emergency contacts updated at same time. No notification. District language mirrors, Claire's. Then I called Daniel. He answered on speaker while from the sound of it, walking somewhere fast. I've got 5 minutes. That's enough. I told him about Susan. He did not interrupt once. When I finished, he said, Good. That's not resolution, but it's confirmation. Confirmation of what? That she moved official structures before she moved family truth. I leaned one hand on the desk. I keep trying to decide whether she thinks she's protecting him or just simplifying him. Those are not mutually exclusive, Daniel said. I shut my eyes. Listen to me, he went on. I spoke with Evelyn Price yesterday. She won't do anything off hearsay alone, but she will look at what we've got if the threshold for intervention rises. Her exact words were, children do not naturally talk like transition plans. That line lodged itself in me. Can she talk to Eli? Not yet cleanly, but if you keep building the pattern and if Claire pushes this recital as public normalization after changing school status and household designation, language, the threshold rises. Public normalization. I looked toward the front parlor then, and the whole room darkened in my mind. Not physically, morally. The piano, the bench, June's penciled books, suddenly all of it stood in relation to an auditorium I had not yet seen. Daniel, I said, I think the performance is the point. He was quiet a beat. Explain. They're not just putting him in classes, they're making him visible under the new arrangement. They want him seen that way. Yes, Daniel said more softly now. That's exactly what it sounds like. When we hung up, I went into the parlor and stood with my hand on the piano lid. The room had become harder to enter. Not because it was frightening, but because it now carried double exposure June and Eli on one layer, Claire's correction on the other. Every cherished thing in it had acquired a second meaning, and I resented that more bitterly than I can make elegant. The beginner songbook was not where I had left it. I knew that immediately, not from anything dramatic. The stack on the shelf sat an inch flatter than before. I pulled the books down, the ribbon-bound sheets, the holiday music folio, the red beginner method June loved because it printed middle C in ridiculous oversize for children's confidence. But not the gray spiral one with Eli's starters on the cover. I searched the shelf twice, then the bench, then the lower cabinet where June kept extra lesson pencils and tuning cloths. Nothing. I stood in the middle of the room and thought Claire was here, not because of the missing book alone, because the room had the slight over-neatness of a place somebody has straightened while pretending not to touch anything. Bench centered too square to the keyboard, lamp cord tucked tighter to the baseboard. The folded afghan on June's chair relayed so its edge ran straighter than I ever bothered to make it. The house was no longer simply remembering what had happened. It was being edited in response to my noticing. That was the first truly memorable suspense of the house for me. Not a bang in the night, not some cinematic scare. Standing in a bright room at 2 in the afternoon and realizing someone had moved through your grief room with practical hands. I called Claire from that room. She answered on the 4th ring. What? No hello, no softness, useful. Were you in my house Monday after I left for the grocery? Greg dropped off Eli's tablet charger. Did you go into the parlor? A pause just long enough. I picked up a music book off the floor. Which one? How should I know, Dad? The one with Eli's name on it. More silence. I could hear traffic noise on her end. She was in the car. It was loose on the bench, she said at last. I put it in the blue bag with the rest of his materials. My whole body chilled, not from the weather, from the fact that she had said it so easily. His materials. As if June's penciled notes belonged in the same category as standardized rehearsal items and monogrammed duffels. As if the point of the room was transferable educational content. That book stays here, I said. It's for him. It was his grandmother's. And it's still for him. The calmness of it. That was what made her frightening. Not defiance. Assimilation. She took the meaning of the old thing and folded it cleanly into the new system. No raised voice required. You don't move things out of that room without asking me. I moved one workbook. You moved June. There was a flat silence then. True silence. No strategy in it for one brief second. Then Claire said in the same measured voice as before, "This is exactly why I didn't want to tell you things midstream." She had the gall to sound weary. I looked around the parlor. The piano, the chair, the framed picnic photograph, the shelf gap where the spiral book had been. "How long have you been taking from this house?" I asked. Her answer came clean. "I'm not having this conversation if you're going to speak like that." Then she hung up. I stood there a long time with the deadline against my ear. That night, Helen Doyle called just after dusk. "Tommy," she said without preamble, "I think you ought to come to your own front window." There was something in her voice I had never heard before. Not gossip, not neighborly curiosity. Decision. I went to the parlor window overlooking the driveway and parted the curtain barely an inch. Claire's SUV sat at the curb, 2 houses down under the maple by the miller's place. Engine off, lights off. She was not coming to the door, just sitting. "Been there 10 minutes, Helen said from the phone. I watched because I knew you were home. I could just make out the glow of a phone screen inside the vehicle. A figure shifting once behind the wheel. What's she doing? If I knew that, I'd tell you." I stayed at the window. After another minute, the driver's side door opened and Claire stepped out. Not toward my house, toward her own trunk. She opened it, leaned in, moved something around, then shut it again. When she stood upright for one strange second, the streetlight caught a soft black shine in her hands. Tap shoes, not on a child, in her hands. Being checked, repositioned, made ready. She set them back, closed the trunk, got in the car, and drove away. I do not know why that undid me more than the paperwork had. Maybe because objects are when plans become physical. Adults can lie in language forever, but there is no abstract version of a child's shoes being arranged in the dark outside his grandfather's house. Helen said, "Tom, I'm here. You need me to come sit with you a while." That offer nearly broke me. "No," I said, "but thank you." After we hung up, I locked the front door again and went room to room, checking windows I had never once in this neighborhood needed to check in daylight. The act was not rational in one sense. Claire was not a burglar, but the house had become morally permeable. That changes how a man moves through it. In the grandson's room, I found the closet door standing slightly open. I knew I had closed it after putting away laundry. Inside on the top shelf, the blue duffel with EH was gone. I stood with one hand on the closet frame and understood another part of the system. This was not just about adding new objects. It was about managing which objects belonged where, under whose roof, in which version of the child. The next morning, Evelyn Price came to the house. Daniel had set it up fast. Not formally, not yet. A consult, he called it. An experienced eye on an emerging situation. She arrived in a charcoal coat with a leather portfolio and the kind of face that did not advertise sympathy because it did not need to. She looked around, 60 at first glance, maybe younger if you measured by posture, older if you measured by the number of things she had clearly already chosen not to be impressed by. I met her in the kitchen. She shook my hand, once sat down at the table and said, "Show me the words before you show me the feelings." I respected her immediately, so I did. Program draft, arts form, texts, notes, withdrawal confirmation, my chronology. Mara's statement written out from memory, Helen's observations, June's missing songbook, changed initials, different room naming, everything in order. Evelyn read without making little professional noises, no hums, no sympathetic tilts of the head, just her eyes moving and one finger occasionally tapping the paper's margin. At last, she removed her glasses and looked at me. "Do you believe your daughter is trying to erase you?" The question was so blunt it almost offended me. "No," I said after a second. "I think she's trying to reorganize him." Evelyn nodded once. "Good. Good. It means you're not inflating this into melodrama." I sat back. She looked down again at the draft program. Children adapt their vocabulary all the time. That alone means little. But adults who want rapid identity reorientation tend to create consistency language around a child before the child is emotionally ready to hold it. That's what concerns me here. The kitchen seemed to still itself around the sentence. "Is this enough?" I asked. "Enough for what? For you to tell me I'm not losing my mind?" One corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile. "No," she said. "You're not losing your mind." I had not known until that moment how badly I needed another adult to say it flatly. She tapped the withdrawal notation I had written from the school call. "This is not enough for immediate formal action by itself. But if your grandson is being publicly presented under altered household designation while pre-existing family bonds are being minimized and school structures have been changed without transparency, then the performance matters more than it looks like it does." I looked at her. "It becomes an event of normalization," she said. "Adults in the audience are taught what arrangement to accept. Children feel that." The words were nearly identical to what Daniel had been circling, but colder, cleaner, impossible to sentimentalize. "What do I do?" Evelyn put her glasses back on. "You stop chasing explanations from your daughter. You preserve every piece of language. You attend the event. You observe the child, not just the program. And you do nothing dramatic with him privately that could later be framed as pressure." I nodded. Then she asked, "What did his grandmother call the parlor?" The question startled me. "June's music room," I said. Then Eli did too. And now, he called it the old piano room. Evelyn wrote that down. Not the corrected version Claire preferred. The old one. The wound. Seeing another person write it made my throat tighten. "Why that?" I asked. "Because room names tell children where meaning lives." She closed the portfolio after another 20 minutes and stood to leave. At the door, she paused in the front hall and looked at the raincoat hook, the umbrella stand, the school pumpkin, the places where a child's life and a dead woman's order still touched each other. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, "this is not overreaction. It is pattern recognition. Don't soften it again." After she left, the house felt different, not safer, more witnessable. There is a difference. Safety is when you believe harm cannot happen. Witness is when you know it has, and you stop helping it hide. I spent the afternoon in June's sewing room assembling a cleaner file. Not because paper wins over love, because paper is what Claire had chosen as one of her instruments, and I was no longer willing to fight her only with pain. I labeled a manila folder in block letters, ELI school/program/language. Below it, I wrote timeline. Then I did something that hurt more than I expected. I opened the cedar chest again and took out 3 old photographs. Eli at the piano beside June, laughing with his mouth wide open because he had hit 3 keys with his forearm and thought he had invented jazz. June kneeling in the yard tying his rain boots while he watched a worm in the driveway. Claire. Years earlier, in a cheap recital costume June had hemmed by hand, looking stiff and beautiful and already slightly apart from her own body. I had trusted that last memory. Trusted it as mother-daughter friction, as the ordinary discomfort of an artistic child who wanted control. Looking at it now, knowing how June had once written, she gets too stiff if she feels watched. I felt the corruption of an old tenderness. Not because the photograph lied, because I had let it remain simpler than it was. That is one of the worst parts of betrayal in a family. It climbs backward. It ruins the safety of memories that used to feel complete. Wednesday came with the sort of clear, hard autumn light that makes every leaf look more itself than usual. By noon, I had the recital location, time, and staging notes from a parent bulletin Helen's niece forwarded after Helen made one phone call and said only, "I need a favor for something I'm watching. Community Arts Center. Friday evening. Youth. Ensemble showcase. Doors at 6:30. Placement group assembled backstage at 6. At 4:30, Claire texted, "Need to stop by quickly and get Eli's black practice shoes and music workbook." Greg forgot them. I stared at the screen. The music workbook? June's book. So she did know exactly what she had taken. I wrote back, "I have the shoes. The workbook stays here." Her response came less than 30 seconds later. "It is not your decision what materials Eli uses. They're plain at last." Not because she meant to show me, because pressure was beginning to shorten her sentences. I stood in the front hall before answering. The afternoon light through the narrow glass by the door had turned gold and severe. The umbrella stand cast a long, thin shadow across the floor. Eli's paper pumpkin tilted from the wall where the tape had loosened. This hall had once meant arrivals, then departures. Now it meant contested transfer. I texted, "Come get the shoes." Nothing else. She arrived 15 minutes later. Alone again. This time I met her at the threshold before she could move farther into the house. The polished realism of her frightened me more now that I understood it. She looked good, composed, grey coat hair smooth, no visible strain, the kind of woman any school, any program, any clerk would instinctively trust to have already handled the details. "I'm in a hurry," she said. "I know. Then give me the shoes." I held the tap shoes by the laces in one hand. Their black leather caught the porch light. Up close, they were smaller than I had imagined, and that made them worse. Tiny, exact, already polished. Shoes designed to teach a child where to place weight. "The workbook stays," I said. "Tom." I said what I said. For the first time, she looked directly at the shoes in my hand, instead of through them. Something in that look told me they were no longer casual equipment. They were necessary. "That material is part of his prep," she said. "His grandmother's notes are not prep material. They are if they help him perform." I felt my whole face go cold. "There it is," I said quietly. "What?" "The difference between you and her." Claire's expression hardened a notch. "Don't do that. She taught him to feel safe enough to be wrong. And I'm teaching him to do something with it." The line came out before she could soften it, and once spoken, even she heard it. We stood there in the porch light, the shoes between us, and for 1 second I thought she might actually say something honest. Not kind, honest. Instead, she extended her hand. The shoes, Dad. I looked at them hanging from my fist. Black leather. Thin soles, small taps at heel and toe. Harmless to anyone who did not know what had been tied into them. Then I handed them over. Not because I surrendered. Because Friday was coming and Evelyn had been right. Observe the child. Observe the event. Do nothing that lets her recast you as pressure. Claire took them, and the relief in her face was so slight, most people would have missed it. I did not miss it. She turned to go, then stopped, one foot already aimed toward the steps. "Please," she said without looking back. "Don't make a scene, Friday." Friday. The first time she had acknowledged I'd be there. I wasn't planning to. She nodded once, still not turning. Good. Then she went down the steps and across the walk, the little black shoes swinging at her side like something she believed she had already won. Friday evening, I parked 2 blocks from the arts center because the lot was full and because I wanted the walk. I needed the air. The building sat low and red brick behind a row of narrow maples already losing their leaves. The glass doors reflecting blue dusk and families moving in with flowers, programs, and children in tiny formal shoes. Nothing about it looked menacing. That was the point. Inside the lobby smelled like her hairspray, coffee from an urn on a folding table, paper programs, and the warm synthetic scent of pressed costumes under stage lights. I heard laughter chairs scraping a piano being tested somewhere deeper inside the building and the thin metallic rhythm of taps on marley floor from behind a closed door. Mara Bell saw me first. She was near the side hallway with a clipboard against her chest. She came over without fuss. "You came?" "Yes. Evelyn is here too." I looked past her and saw Evelyn Price near the back of the lobby speaking to a woman in a navy blazer. Not intrusive, just present enough to matter. Mara lowered her voice. "There was a final program change this afternoon." My stomach tightened. "What kind?" She glanced at the clipboard, then back at me. "They moved Eli from intake ensemble to featured transition introduction." The phrase was so grotesquely clean, I nearly laughed in her face. "What does that mean?" "It means," she said carefully, "he comes out early." "Under what name?" She hesitated. That was enough. The auditorium doors opened for seating. Families began drifting in. Somewhere down the backstage, child started to cry and was immediately hushed by 3 adults at once. The sound passed through me like a draft. Mara touched my sleeve. "Mr. Whitaker." I looked at her. "He is not excited tonight," she said. "He is being very, very good." That was the cruelest thing anyone said to me all week. I took my seat halfway back on the aisle. Good sight line to the stage. Good view of the side entrance. Not so close I'd look like I was waiting to object. The room filled slowly with the pleasant noise of ordinary people about to applaud children in outfits too formal for their bones. There is a special kind of obscenity in how normal public rooms remain when private betrayal is about to ask for witness. I saw Claire 3 rows ahead on the left, with Greg beside her. She had dressed in dark green, elegant, without trying too hard. Greg wore a navy sport coat and the same expression competent men wear at charity events and graduation banquets when they have decided to become part of something tasteful. They did not look back. The lights dimmed in the house, not out, just down enough to turn the room toward the stage. A teacher introduced the evening. "Welcome. Young talent, growth, community, support during transitions." That last word again from the podium now, and half the room received it with the approving vagueness such words always count on. My pulse was hard in my throat. I do not know what made me stand up then. Not fully. Instinct, maybe. The need not to be trapped in a seat while this went forward. I moved quietly to the aisle and slipped through the side door marked "Staff Only," just as a volunteer with a headset stepped aside to let someone else through. If she saw me, she took me for somebody's grandfather, looking lost and too dignified to stop publicly. The backstage hall was narrower than I expected, painted institutional beige, lit too brightly for mercy. Children in costume clustered near taped floor marks. One girl in sequins practiced a smile at the cinder block wall. A boy in suspenders yawned so hard, his fake mustache peeled at one corner. Someone had spilled powder near a chair leg. The whole place smelled like warm fabric nerves and spray adhesive. Then I saw Eli. He was standing near a folding table under a paper sign that read, "Transition Group," dressed in slate gray pants, white shirt, black vest, hair combed too flat, holding still in the way tired children do when adults have told them stillness helps. Beside his feet sat the tap shoes, already on, polished, assigned. He was not crying. He was not frightened in any way that would mobilize a room. He was doing exactly what Mara had said, being very, very good. And the look on his face was not excitement. It was care. He was standing under the paper sign in those black tap shoes, hands at his sides, shoulders, held too carefully for a child, and I knew with a clarity that felt almost merciful that I was done, waiting to see whether this would somehow soften on its own. A woman with a headset saw me first. "Sir Family needs to stay in the house," she said not unkindly, already moving toward me with one hand half raised, the way people do when they are trying to prevent awkwardness before it blooms. Before I could answer, Eli turned his head. He did not smile. He did not run to me. He just looked at me with a kind of tired hope that no 8-year-old should ever have to wear on his face, and in that one look I understood the exact cruelty of what Claire had built. She had not made him frightened enough to trigger a room. She had made him manageable enough to be misread. "I'm his grandfather," I said to the woman. "I'm not here to interrupt anything. I just need 1 minute." She was still deciding whether this was one of those family moments arts centers get too often and want no part of when Mara Bell appeared from the side corridor, clipped her clipboard under one arm and said, "He's with me." The woman stepped back. Mara came close enough to keep her voice private. "You cannot take him out of here." "Not yet." "I know." "That matters." I nodded once. "I know that too." Eli was watching both of us. I went to him slowly and crouched so we were eye level. Up close, I could see powder at the edge of his hairline. Not much. Just enough to make his skin look less like his own. The vest they had him in was a size too formal, if that makes sense. It fit. That was the problem. It fit the version of him they were presenting. "You all right, pal?" I asked. He nodded automatically. I waited. After a second, he gave a smaller nod. The true one, the one that meant not really, but I'm not sure what answer is allowed in this room. "You don't have to say the right thing for me," I told him quietly. His eyes flicked toward the stage door, then back to me. "Mom says it's just one part. There are sentences a child should never have to carry for adults. That was one of them, one part of..." "What?" He swallowed. "The introduction. Did they tell you what to say?" Another glance, another careful silence. "Eli. They said if anybody asks, I say I'm with the Hale family now for program. Now. For programs." The room around us kept moving. A teacher calling places, a little girl in sequins asking for her mother, a boy hopping on one foot to fix his sock. Normal backstage life, all of it. I could hear the MC on stage welcoming the audience to an evening of growth and confidence and community support. And the obscenity of that ordinary voice over this exact moment nearly took the breath out of me. "Do you want to do this?" I asked. He looked at me the way children look when adults finally ask the only question that mattered, and it has come almost too late. "I don't know what I'm supposed to want," he said. Something in my chest gave way then. Not in a loud emotional collapse, in a cleaner, older way, a breaking that left behind structure instead of noise. Mara touched my shoulder lightly. "Mr. Whitaker." I stood. At the end of the hall, beyond a half-open fire door, I saw Evelyn Price coming toward us, with Daniel beside her. Daniel had loosened his tie and lost his jacket somewhere along the way, which told me this evening had already gone further than a routine observation. Evelyn moved as she always did, without drama, without hurry, making other people rearrange around her, without quite knowing why they had done it. Claire saw me at the same moment she saw them. She was coming out of the wings from the audience side with Greg at her shoulder. one hand already halfway lifted in that small, placating motion she used before she began speaking the sentence she wanted everyone else to live inside. But when she noticed Evelyn, the hand dropped. That was the first visible fracture, not a mask falling off yet, just the knowledge that more than one adult in the room would be hearing this. "What are you doing back here?" Claire asked. Not shouted, not hissed, just too fast. Evelyn answered before I could. Observing. Claire's eyes moved to her, then to Daniel, then back to me. The calculations were all visible now. Not because she had become wild, but because the room had become too crowded for her to smooth each surface in time. "This is not appropriate," Claire said. "This is a children's event. It was turned into an adult event the moment you filed him under a revised household designation and told him what name to answer to," Daniel said. He spoke quietly. That mattered. Loudness would have helped her. Quietness made her work harder. Greg stepped forward, then for the first time palms open the way men use them when they want to look like reason has entered the situation. I think everybody needs to take a breath. I turned toward him. "You knew." He held my gaze only a beat too long. I knew Claire was trying to create consistency. There it was again. Their church word, their office word, their bloodless little altar, for who I asked. He did not answer. Claire drew herself up in the bright backstage light, and for a second I saw exactly how many rooms that posture had won for her over the years. Schools, offices, parent meetings, neighbors' driveways. Anywhere composure got mistaken for moral authority. "Dad," she said, using the old word because witnesses were present now. I am not doing this in front of him. I could have answered 10 different ways. I could have named the school withdrawal, the removed emergency contacts, the missing photo, the altered initials, the arts roster, the workbook taken from June's shelf. I had every right to each of those truths. Instead, I said the one thing that belonged to this exact room. You already did. The silence that followed was not complete. There were still children, shifting teachers, whispering stage sounds moving through the wall. But inside our small cluster of bodies in that hallway, something finally stood still. Claire opened her mouth, then closed it. Evelyn said, "Ms. Hale, I need to ask whether you informed this child's grandfather that the school withdrawal, household designation changes, and introduction language would coincide with a public performance event." The phrasing was clinical enough to corner her without granting her a scene. Claire gave a short, incredulous breath. "This is absurd. He is not being trafficked through a witness protection program. It's a recital." "No," I said. "It isn't." Her head turned toward me sharply. "It's a correction," I said. "That's what you've been doing. Not helping him. Correcting him." "Stop. You changed his school without telling me. You changed the contact list. You changed his name on paper. You changed what he calls rooms in my house. You took your mother's workbook off my shelf and put it in a program bag like it was just prep material. And now you've got him back here in those shoes telling people what family he belongs to for programs." I took one breath. "That's not a recital, Claire. That's an introduction." Greg tried again. "Tom, you're making this sound sinister when it's really just strategic," Daniel said, cutting across him. "That's the word you're all searching for." The woman with the headset had retreated several feet, but not out of earshot. 2 other instructors were pretending to sort papers while listening with their whole bodies. Public rooms always know when private truths are close to surfacing. People become busier and stiller at the same time. Claire's face changed again. Less polished now, less arranged. She was still trying to hold the room, but I could see strain entering the edges. "You don't understand what it is, like she said to me, to have every single part of your son pull him backward." The line came out before she could refine it, and the moment it did, June entered the room more fully than she had since she died. Not as a ghost, as a measure. Maribel looked down. Daniel went very still. Evelyn's pen stopped over her notebook. I said, "Backward." Claire saw what she had exposed and tried to recover. "That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. You want him to stay the same. In that house, in those rooms, in those stories, in that grief. Her voice did not rise, but the polish had thinned enough now that the hurt underneath was audible. You and Mom made memory the whole climate of that place. He walks in, and it all tells him who he's supposed to be. That one wounded because part of it was true. Houses do tell stories, that is what they are for. But truth bent at the wrong angle becomes a weapon. No, I said. It told him who loved him. Claire laughed then. One sharp sound. No warmth in it, no management left. That was the moment the mask truly failed, not in screaming, not in villain theatrics, but in that laugh. Because it held her contempt for everything she had spent months translating into professional language. You think love is enough because you got to stay in it, she said. You got to live in the same rooms and keep the same lamp on and call the same room, the same thing and feed him the same spaghetti and pretend that's continuity. Do you know what it was like after she died? Do you know what it was like to walk into that house and feel her in every corner and see him turning into more of her every month? The hall was silent now except for the muffled applause starting and stopping from the stage beyond the curtain. I looked at her, and there it was, the real center of it. Not Greg, not blended family logistics, not tutoring, not school options, not even the public program. She could not bear resemblance. She could not bear the dead remaining legible in the living. You were not protecting him from grief, I said. You were protecting yourself from recognition. Her face went white and then flushed in the same second. That is cruel. No, I said. Cruel is teaching an 8-year-old to look at me before he answers a question about the piano. She actually flinched. Behind me, I heard the stage manager say, "Transition group in 2." No one moved. Evelyn stepped forward just enough that her presence became the wall Claire would have to either push through or hear. "I have heard enough tonight," she said. "This child should not be introduced in a public family designation structure while there is an active dispute over transparency naming school status and bond minimization. If you proceed now, you are doing so after formal notice that the context is contested." Claire turned to her with a kind of desperate reasonableness. "You have not even met my son properly. I have heard his language reported by multiple adults. I have seen your paperwork language. I have heard your father speak, and I have heard you speak." Evelyn's tone did not change. That is proper enough to halt one recital introduction. The stage manager, who had definitely not intended to become part of any of this when she put on her headset that evening, looked from Evelyn to Claire and then to the child in the tap shoes. Claire said, "He's already dressed." That sentence may have been the ugliest of the night. Not because of what it meant literally, because in her mouth it sounded like an argument for completion. The costume had been put on. The role had been prepared. The public should therefore receive it. I felt something settle in me then. Not anger. A kind of stillness so complete it almost felt like peace. I crouched beside Eli again. He was looking from one adult to another the way children do when they are trying to figure out whether the room is finally saying out loud what they have been carrying alone. "Look at me," I said. He did. "You do not have to go out there tonight if you don't want to." Claire made a sound behind me. Not a word, just protest trying to become authority. I did not take my eyes off Eli. "You hear me?" He looked at the stage door, then at the shoes, then back at me. "What happens if I don't?" It was the most adult question I had ever heard from him. I answered like he deserved the truth. "Some people will be upset." He waited. "But you will still be you." His mouth trembled once. Not crying. Decision coming too close to the surface. What if Mom gets mad? That one went through me cleanly. Then she gets mad, I said, and the room survives. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then Eli nodded. Small, but real. The stage manager, who by now understood the moral geometry of the thing, even if she did not know the whole history, said into her headset, "Hold transition group." Claire stepped forward. "You do not get to do this. That line was to me, but it sounded like it had been spoken to the whole evening. I stood and faced her. "Yes," I said. "I do." It was the first time all week I had answered her without apology in my body. Something gave way in her then. Not theatrically, more painfully than that. She looked all at once less like a composed woman and more like a daughter standing in the wreckage of the one argument she had spent her whole life refusing to lose. "You always take her side," she said. The words were so old I nearly missed them. Then I understood. Not just this week, not just Eli, not just June's death. Years of comparison of June seeing too much too clearly of Claire, hearing love as exposure when she could not control the terms of it. The revelation did not excuse her. It wounded more deeply because it made the betrayal more human. "I am not taking her side," I said quietly. "I am taking his." And, because the night had already stripped us down to bone, I added, "The tragedy is that you think those are different sides." Her eyes filled, but not with the kind of tears that cleanse. With frustrated humiliation, with being seen too directly in front of other adults. Greg put a hand at her back. She jerked away from it. That was when the last bit of normal mask failed completely. Not in collapse, but in the way she said the next line with no care left for how it sounded. "I cannot keep dragging a dead woman through every room of my son's life." No one spoke? Not Mara, not Daniel, not Evelyn, not the stage manager with the headset, not the teachers by the folding table. Because every person there understood at once what had been underneath all the curated language from the start. I think even Claire understood she had finally said it too plainly. The lights beyond the curtain shifted for the next number. Applause rose and fell unaware of us. That was one of the strangest things about the night. A whole room of people was having an ordinary community evening 15 feet away from the axis on which my family had just split open. Evelyn closed her notebook. "Thank you," she said. Claire looked at her as if she had been slapped. "Excuse me. You've just made the emotional basis of the rescripting clear." The word hung in the air between all of us, not because it was dramatic, because it was exact. Claire's shoulders dropped half an inch. Then she reached for the only ground she had left. "I'm his mother." "Yes," Evelyn said. "And tonight you have demonstrated a willingness to minimize primary attachment bonds and substitute household performance language in a contested context. That matters." Daniel stepped in, then not in front of me, not taking over just beside. "Claire listened to me carefully. This can either stop here tonight with people still willing to treat it as a repairable judgment failure, or it can continue into a formal pattern record with every phrase from this hallway attached to it." Greg finally understood enough to look frightened. Claire looked at Eli. I watched her see maybe for the first time that week how small he actually was in the vest and tap shoes and too careful stillness. Not a concept, not a future, a child. Her face broke in a quieter way then, not into remorse, into exhaustion at the cost of not winning. "Take the shoes off," she said. No one moved. She said it again to him this time. "Eli, you can take them off." The line should have sounded tender. It sounded administrative even now. He bent and fumbled with the straps. His fingers shook. I knelt without asking and helped him. The leather was warm from his feet. Tiny metal taps catching the backstage fluorescence. When I lifted them clear and set them on the floor beside the folding chair, they looked absurdly small for the amount of damage they had carried. Eli stayed sitting after that in his black socks on the cold linoleum shoulders, lowering one careful inch at a time. The stage manager exhaled audibly. Mara turned away and wiped at one eye fast enough that maybe she hoped no one saw. Helen, who had somehow made it farther backstage than I would have thought possible for a 71-year-old woman with bird-watching binoculars and an iron sense of timing, appeared at the end of the hall and said to no one in particular, "Well, there's your answer then." I almost laughed from pure gratitude that she existed. What followed was not a clean cinematic climax. Real life almost never gives you that. It was slower, messier, and in some ways more satisfying because of it. The event continued without Eli's introduction. Mara and the stage manager handled that with a competence that made me realize how often women save other people's dignity in public spaces and receive no medal for it. Evelyn took statements that night, brief and factual. Not because the whole case would be built in an arts center hallway, but because timing matters. Witnesses matter. Words said close to their own damage matter. Daniel stood with me while I gave mine. Helen gave hers in the same matter-of-fact tone she used to discuss bird migration. Mara described the rehearsal language and Eli's carefulness with the kind of professional restraint that gives truth more force, not less. Claire left before the last number ended. Not dramatically. No scene in the lobby, no second showdown. Greg guided her out in a silence that looked more final than any yelling would have. She did not try to take Eli that night. Whether that was strategy shock or some buried piece of conscience surfacing too late, I still do not know. What I know is that when the auditorium doors opened and families spilled out into the cool night with bouquets and diaper bags and overexcited children, Eli stood beside me in his white shirt and black socks, holding his regular sneakers in one hand. He did not ask where his mother was. He just said, "Can we go home now? Home. Not your house. Not the old place. Home." "Yes," I said. In the car, he fell asleep before we got through the second stoplight, one cheek against the seatbelt, hair loosened at the crown where the comb had given up. His vest lay in a heap on the back floorboard. The tap shoes sat in a brown paper bag at my feet because the stage manager had pressed them into my hands on the way out and said, "These belong with whoever knows what they mean." I drove slowly. There is a kind of quiet that comes after public truth. Not relief exactly. Relief still expects some return to what was before. This was different. The quiet of a bridge crossed, knowing the fire behind you will keep burning whether you turn around or not. At home, I carried him inside and he woke just enough to stand on his own while I got his shoes off. The front hall lamp threw its soft yellow over the umbrella stand. The paper pumpkin, the hooks, all the same objects that had looked like evidence a day earlier. They still were evidence, but they were also beginning just barely to become household things again. "You hungry?" I asked. He shook his head. "Tired?" He nodded. I took him to his room and changed him into the dinosaur pajama bottoms I still kept in the second drawer, even though he insisted they were for babies now. He was too tired to argue. Good. Let the body choose comfort before identity. There was a lesson there I wished every adult in my family had learned sooner. When I pulled back the blanket, he said, "Grandpa." "Yeah." "Did I do something bad?" The room tilted on me. "No," I said. "You did something true." He looked at me as if truth were a complicated thing to be accused of. "Will Mom come back?" I sat on the edge of the bed. "Yes," I said after a second, "but not tonight." That was all I could promise, honestly. He nodded and let me tuck the blanket around him. Then, just before sleep took him fully, he said, "I didn't like when they said I was with the Hale household. It felt like homework." I kissed his forehead because I could not trust my voice for a moment. When I closed his door, the hall seemed longer and gentler at once. The justice did not come in one blow the next morning. It came the way most real justice comes, through paperwork, witnesses, timing, and one person no longer willing to smooth over what had been done. Daniel filed for emergency temporary clarification of contact and decision-making around education and extracurricular presentation. Evelyn's notes carried weight because she was not family. The school district, once the questions became specific and adult enough, grew much less interested in acting as though this had been a harmless transition misunderstanding. There were meetings, there were calls, there were forms in careful envelopes. Claire had counsel by Wednesday. So did I. What satisfied me was not seeing her crushed. It was seeing her rendered unable to use tone as a substitute for substance. She could explain school flexibility, all she wanted. She could describe blended family consistency and language as polished as she pleased. But once the timeline existed, withdrawal filed. Tuesday. Emergency contacts changed. Private program designation, submitted household terminology, standardized. Grandfather, uninformed child. Coached into public introduction, the clean lines of her story began to fail under their own neatness. She was not charged with a crime. This was not that kind of story and never should have been. But the court moved quickly enough on the child-centered issues that mattered. Temporary orders required educational transparency, prohibited unilateral changes to the child's presented legal and family designation in school and community settings without review, and restored my access in writing instead of custom. That last part wounded me more than I expected. To have love reduced to a paper right after a week spent watching it be edited. But sometimes paper is what stands between a child and the adults who think intimacy excuses improvisation. The deeper justice landed elsewhere. It landed in rooms. It landed the first Saturday after the hearing when Claire came to the house to pick up Eli and stood in the front hall under the same lamp where she had once corrected the room name. She did not step farther in without being asked. She did not touch the mudroom desk. She did not rearrange a single thing. Eli came down the hall past the parlor and said naturally without checking anyone's face, "First, I left my book in Grandma June's music room." No one corrected him. Claire's jaw tightened. That is the truth. But she did not correct him. That was justice too. We did not heal cleanly. I would distrust any story that claimed we did. Claire and I spoke because legal and practical life required it. Sometimes she was controlled, sometimes brittle. Once 3 weeks after the recital, she sat in my kitchen at the very table where Eli had laid down his blue spelling folder and cried with such anger in it that I almost mistook it for contempt until I heard the child inside the sound. "I couldn't breathe in this family after she died," she said. "Everything in that house kept telling me what mattered, and it was never me." That one stayed with me. Because part of parenthood, if we are honest, is accepting that our children can be genuinely wounded by a house we experienced as love. It did not absolve what she had done to Eli, but it did restore a difficult humanity to it, and that mattered if the end was going to remain dignified instead of cheap. I told her the only truth I had that day. "You were never not loved here, Claire. You were just never allowed to be the only reality in the room." She looked at me across the table for a long time. Not forgiving. Not forgiven. Just finally, hearing the shape of what had stood between us long before the recital, long before Greg. Maybe long before June died. Some things were reclaimed, some were not. I never got the exact old version of my daughter back, if such a version had ever existed outside my own simplifications. She never got to remake our family without resistance. We settled, if that is the word. Into a harder truth, love can continue after exposure, but it does not continue innocent. The late wife restoration came quietly. A month after the recital, I found June's gray spiral workbook in the front seat of my truck when I came out of the hardware store. No note, no message. Just the workbook laid carefully on the seat, the cover worn soft at the corners. Eli's starters still penciled on the front in June's hand. Inside, tucked between 2 pages, was the missing photograph from Eli's room. June at the piano, Eli grinning up at her, bent slightly at one corner. I sat in the truck with the parking lot noise around me and that picture in my hands, and for the first time since the school hallway, I let myself cry without trying to make it useful. Not because the picture solved anything, because it told the truth about what had nearly been lost and what had not been. That evening I put the photograph back in Eli's room, not on the shelf, on the wall again where it had always hung. I let the bent corner show. June had been right. Anything worth keeping is allowed a mark or two. As for the tap shoes, I did not throw them away. That would have made too simple a symbol out of something more complicated than that. The week after the recital, I cleaned them. Not tenderly, not angrily either, just thoroughly. I wiped off the backstage dust, checked the straps, wrapped them in brown paper, then I placed them in a plain shoebox and wrote on the lid in black marker, "Friday night." I put the box in the hall closet above the rain gear and below the extra blankets. Not hidden, not displayed, kept Because the truth is, objects do not deserve the full moral burden of what adults pour into them. Those shoes had almost become a role. They had also become a refusal. Both belonged in the record. Winter came slowly that year. Eli spent more afternoons at my house again, some by court schedule, some because Claire finally understood that fighting every overlap would cost her more than letting him keep a life in two places. The school reinstated him cleanly after the tutoring, and enrichment language lost its protective shine. Mrs. Henley did not mention the Monday morning again, for which I was grateful. She just handed me a spelling list one Thursday and said, "He did well on the one with double consonants, as if ordinary sentences were their own form of mercy." The house changed too. Not back, never back. Forward into a new honesty. The mudroom desk stayed half-cleared, one drawer, now dedicated to papers I had once trusted other people to manage. The front hall felt less like a contested border. The kitchen lost some of its courtroom edge and became again a place for oatmeal spaghetti and socks kicked sideways by the radiator. The grandson's room grew messier, which I took as a blessing. The sewing room remained what it had become, a place where continuity could be worked on, not merely mourned. The deepest reclamation happened in the parlor. For weeks after the recital, Eli avoided the piano without seeming to mean to. He would circle the room, sit in June's chair, pull books from the lower shelf, build block forts by the rug, but not touch the bench. I did not push. You cannot restore a child by putting him back where he almost got rewritten and demanding courage on schedule. Then, one evening in late November, blue light already thinning at the windows, he came in from the yard, wearing his own jeans and the green sweatshirt with a frayed cuff he liked because Claire said it was too worn, and I said that was exactly why it still belonged to a child. He stood in the parlor doorway a moment and looked at the piano. I was in June's chair pretending to read the paper. He walked over to the bench and sat down. Not to perform, not with posture, not checking for approval. He just sat. His feet did not reach the pedals. His hands stayed in his lap. The room held still around him the way good rooms do when they know they are being trusted again. "You want the beginner book?" I asked. He shook his head. "Okay." We stayed there a while without speaking. After a minute, he said, "Grandma June's music room is quieter now." "Yes," I said. "Not bad quiet." "I know." Then he asked, "Can I just sit here?" "You can sit there as long as you want." And that is the image I keep. Not the hallway at school, not the draft program, not Claire in the porch light asking for the shoes, not even the backstage moment when he chose not to walk out under the name they had prepared. I keep this one, the parlor after everything. The lamp by June's chair on, the winter blue evening at the windows, the house not healed, but honest. The photograph back on the wall, bent corner and all. The tap shoes boxed in the closet where they could no longer speak for anyone. And Eli in his own clothes sitting at the piano bench with his hands in his lap, not performing, not introduced, not corrected, while the room around him knew his name again.